What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dave.
Try something new.
I liked it. I like a little keeping me on my toes there. But we're back, and we are in week 2 of our Ripples of Generosity series, where we are talking about stewardship of not just money, but also our time, our talents, our energy, that type of stuff. So I'm excited to get into this.
Sure.
I'm sorry I missed last week. I appreciate you getting some coverage and all that. But
Yeah, Chip did a great job.
Chip did do a good job. And
Yeah.
but I'm excited to do this one here with you today.
All right, let's do it.
All right. Well, Dave, I do recognize that a couple of us are probably dragging a little bit after being up so late watching.
But there's only 2 of us. That's a couple.
Oh, that's true. You're right.
So
So,
we're
both
both
of us
yeah.
dragging just a tad from watching the Georgia game last night. Luckily, it went our way, so
Yeah.
makes worth staying up a little later, but a little easier.
If you're a Tennessee fan, my apologies. It's a great team.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Your
hopefully-
quarterback's gonna be scary for a while.
Oh, good Lord.
He was pretty impressive. I'm not gonna lie.
What is he, 19 years old?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. But yeah, it was a good, and not to get ahead of ourselves, but Kendall Sherrill gave a testimony in church today, and as we were setting it up, he said, "Well, I can do it, but I'll be coming back from the Georgia game." And so even then, first of all, I knew it would be late.
Yep.
And I also knew that it could go badly.
Yeah.
And that might affect,
how he does up there.
yeah. All we had to deal with him was him not having much of a voice because of yelling at the game. But
Yeah.
Man, the crowd last night.
That was fun.
Oh yeah, the crowd was just.
It was good. It was good. But let's jump into this Ripples of Generosity.
Sure.
We have a lot to cover and a lot to get through. So why don't you kind of give us, a preface of what you spoke about, and then we can dive deeper into it.
Well, it is Ripples of Generosity, and I think we kind of unpacked this a little bit last week. But I came on this image. I'd heard it. There's another church that had used Ripples of Generosity. And I was going like, man, that's such a great image because you think of a big pond that's still and that and the influences, the waves, the ripples of influence go out all the way to the shore if it's big enough.
Yep.
Yeah, and the more people doing it, the bigger then the more ripples that go out that can affect change. And so as disciples of Jesus Christ, we're called to be people that transform the world for Jesus Christ, correct?
Yeah.
So transforming, bringing about change. And so I liked that. And so, it in some ways, not to just take this the way it is, it's a stewardship series. So
Sure.
there's a lot of it that's similar every year. I tried to, last week, talk about why we give. We didn't get, Chip and I talked about it, we didn't, but why we give, because I feel like the church at times has been a little bit more into almost kind of adjacent to sort of the prosperity gospel. It's like you give because
So you'll get back,
you're going
or-
to get back. It's a very transactional kind of thing.
Right.
Or churches can be like, you got to kind of out of guilt. It's like, if you don't give, we're going to have to, cut all these things out or whatever. And I really don't think that should be our fundamental basis for giving. We give because we've been blessed by God and we're created to give. We're wired up to give. And when we give, we do get back. It may not be financial things, but we do receive something, and it's life.
Yeah.
Giving is life-giving. And when we live in generosity, our mental health, our spiritual health, the health of our church and community, it all kind of ripples out from that. And so that was last week. And then this week, I wanted to address a couple of things. First of all, just to be kind of honest of where we are,
Yep.
but also to bring hope to that, and doing that to kind of set up the difference between having sort of a mindset or a worldview or a theology that would be one that would be kind of locked into scarcity and one that would be locked into God's abundance. So that's kind of where we started today.
Yeah, so I really like this idea of scarcity abundance, and let's kind of dig a little bit into that, because I do think that we kind of live in both of those realms from time to time. And I was actually reflecting as you were talking about it and be like, yeah, I get it. There's definitely some times where I feel that there's not enough, and I try to, carve everything and make sure all my necessities and all that stuff are met first. And then there's times in life where I'm like, you know what, like I have plenty, and I'm willing to be more generous. Like I feel like I kind of ping between both at times.
Yeah.
So
I do
I
think
resonate.
I do think there's a balance there, in that we are called to be good stewards of the things that we have.
Yeah.
And so let's take something, as like the finance committee. They have to look at what resources we have, and they do have to be good stewards with it. And sometimes that does mean changing things or cutting things or that sort of thing. But our finance committee, under Kendall's leadership, and really all of them, but they've sort of had a philosophy is that, like, you do not do addition by subtraction. And to me, that is the theology of abundance.
Right.
And so, and not to jump ahead again, I told the story about two different churches.
Yeah.
And I think also just owning where we are right now, it's been a difficult season for church, for our church, and really, in some ways, for churches everywhere.
Sure.
And so, thinking about coming back from COVID and not having as many people, not having as much giving going on, going through the disaffiliation and losing some very dear friends and church members through the disaffiliation process. So all of that's what happened. That's where we are.
Yep.
And so what are we going to do with it? We could sort of spiral downward into this theology of scarcity, and we got to survive, so we need to start hoarding in and bringing things in so that we can survive.
Yeah.
Or we can trust God's abundance, and there is some give and take there.
Yeah.
You're called to be generous. That doesn't mean that you give everything that you have to
Sure.
so that, but we can be generous if God calls us to be faithful, and then know that God's going to bless, and God created it all. So His resources are unlimited. So does that make sense?
It does. It does. And, as I reflect kind of on those, because you kind of referenced 4 years, this COVID time frame, and then going into disaffiliation, I really, as I was thinking about it, in the middle of those things, it felt a lot like self-preservation in a lot of ways.
Right.
Which might be the scarcity or whatever really speaking out, because we were just trying to keep ministries together. I mean, honestly, trying to keep our staff intact. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of these things that were happening that kind of made us turn a little bit inward. And then you kind of follow that up with the disaffiliation. And, I always tell people, I was like, it felt like the perfect storm of stuff for the church, of like, it's just, it felt like stuff that we couldn't control at all, and we just kind of had to ride the wave. But I also see how, in abundance, God blessed us tremendously through it. Yeah, we did lose some people. Yeah, we did kind of, battle and had to do some hard meetings and stuff like that. But overall, the church, it feels like we're kind of at a light at the end of the tunnel, where we can kind of just focus back on being the church, being that generous church
Focus
in
on
our
mission
community.
again. Yeah,
exactly. But also, I think about the way money just showed up at times for us, where we were really stressed. I remember there's 2 or 3 years where we got to right around this time where we're doing our new budget cycles and stuff like that. And we're like, ooh, this might have to get cut, or this might have to be, but God always showed up, always provided. And I feel very fortunate and very blessed to continue to be able to use my gifts and talents to further this and not have to worry about tearing it down.
Sure.
Does it make sense?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, I think coming out of those years, we might not have noticed as much before because maybe it was more of a trickle. And it was in every church. It was in my last church, and I know it was here at Hickory Flat because I've seen the numbers. But, over time, there was a decline
Sure.
in that, and it was gradual, so that people thought that, well, it might turn around, or that's unpleasant, so I don't want to think about it or talk about it.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you realize there's half the people here that were here at one time.
Oh, yeah.
And so where they are, and that kind of affects your self-esteem as a church.
Yeah.
And then this church has been sort of grown to the place where there's a certain expectation of ministries and staffing and that sort of thing. And so, there's fear can kind of enter into that. So how are we going to survive? And you get into survival mode.
Yeah.
And so going back to I don't think I told the story, I think I just mentioned it, but the story that I told at the end of two churches, and those really are two churches. I'm not going to say who they were because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. But, there were two churches in very similar situations who were in a lot of ways very similar to us. And so they had some choices to make. One church chose, well, we're going to have to cut some things. And part of the things that we're going to have to cut is outreach. And then later, they started cutting staff. And then, they kept cutting and cutting until they cut off the lights. The other church took, they did some similar things in taking care of their budget and trying to make things stretch as far as they can. But they did not stop their ministry, particularly of the outreach. And they did not, like when something came across their plate, like the story I mentioned about the family that had the great needs, who was in the community that everybody knew.
Right.
They circled around this family and was with them, and they really were the catalyst for the whole town or that whole community coming around this family. And then people were saying, like, that's the kind of church I want to be a part of.
Yeah.
That's the kind of church that's making a difference. Not just doing, programs and entertaining people, but they're really doing some positive work that's just making a change and transformation.
Yeah.
And so that church caught light again and really kind of even though they had been in decline for a little bit, they suddenly experienced a turnaround. And, if you talk to the pastor and the people involved, it was to the decision that we are going to trust God's abundance and be generous and faithful in that. And if we spiral down into this theology of scarcity, and we just got to cut and cut because there's only going to be so many resources, they will run out.
Yeah.
But if we open ourselves up to God's abundance, then I think we see God's faithfulness through us in doing that.
Yeah. And I, you're talking at a church level, but I think that even goes down to the individual level of like what difference can we individually make as well? Because, as a church, you're talking through leadership and stuff like that who said, we are going to be generous with what we give. And I think that's something that we as a church aspire to be as well and work hard to do, is to be generous with what we have for our community, for the people around us, for people who have needs, but also individually, I think we kind of make that choice is how do we be generous ourselves to either help our church fulfill that mission or help those our neighbors who are around us and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and the truth is, we've been operating in a place financially that isn't sustainable. And that there can be fear with that, and wondering what was going to happen. But over the last year, we've made some strides with that. We're not where we will be and where we wish we would be.
Right.
But we're a lot better than we were a year ago. And if we can make that same kind of progress, which I have every belief that we will, then we are moving to a place of sustainability. And I think it's going to be a revival of sorts in the church. And to not get into the mindset, I talked about where we are right now. And for a lot of people, we can get this mindset where the good old days are gone, and they never will be here again. But I think the good old days, the best days could be before us. Sure. And part of that is it's it's going to teach us to be more trusting of God.
Yeah.
Because if you get to a place where the only way forward is is trusting God, not by something that we did or pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps to do, but because of God's faithfulness.
Yeah.
I think we learn by that, and we become more faithful in our following of Christ.
Sure. And as someone who was here during the high times of the church, I guess, where, like you said, attendance was almost double or whatever. I think the thing that I recognized then, and I was just a youth then, so I will admit that I probably had a limited view of the whole thing. But what I noticed then was that people were consistently using their gifts, their energy, their stewardship of their money, time, like all those things. They were consistently using it to further the mission of God. You know what I mean? And I think at the very core, to me, it was never about the numbers that excited me about the church then. It was more about watching what people were doing with what they had. And I think that if we're, looking towards this bright future, as you say, and stuff like that, that's what we need to settle into is that, again, is using our time, using our energy, using our gifts, using our money in ways that are glorifying to God, and not to be people who are just looking inward. We can't just focus on us. We have to focus on our community. We have to focus in on how we're reaching those who don't know Jesus yet.
Yeah, it's well said. It's well said. It is. I mean, you think about like financial resources. I mean, you don't really necessarily need financial resources to serve.
Yeah.
You don't need those to care. You don't need those to listen to others. What we need is open hearts, and for us to look at the stewardship of other parts of our aspects of our life, like our time and just our empathy and attentiveness.
Yeah.
But I am grateful for this church. This church is, and sometimes the risk in doing a sermon like this is to have people think that you're shaming them or whatever, and it's really not, because this is a very generous church.
Yeah.
And I've seen that time and time again with that. So I think it's just leaning into that generosity and recognizing that this might be a season of time where we're kind of reconfiguring some things, but God's not done with us yet.
Sure.
And we're, we can take hope and faith in that.
Yeah. And if you're somebody who might be like, oh, I feel ashamed, I do want to just reiterate that sometimes, especially when we talk through different things that come up often in faith, is look at it more as getting back to the basics. Any professional musician, any professional sports player, like sometimes it's just about getting back to the basics of what faith looks like, or what that craft would look like to make sure you're moving forward continuously. A lot of times it's in those routines, in those practices and stuff like that we really solidify and create a good foundation for our faith growing forward. So when we talk about this, it's not necessarily to shame or to hurt or anything like that. It's more of like, this is a practice that helps us be who God created us to be going forward.
And what you're talking about is like the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Getting back to leaning back into the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Not to go all sports, but Georgia's receivers need to work on the fundamentals of
catching the ball,
of holding the balls. Those are fundamentals. But once you get those, it'll be great.
Right.
And so maybe some of the fundamentals are things around stewardship.
Yeah.
Because stewardship is such a deep part of discipleship. And so, as we think about giving, maybe, someone's finances may be to the point where, to think about tithing would be unrealistic and and actually cause harm.
Yeah.
And I don't think God would have that, but you can grow towards that.
Sure.
Taking step by step. What can you do?
Yep.
And then what's the next step that you can take? Growing towards that, so to the point where it is a tithe. And so, it's all, we did not get to where we were overnight. It didn't
Right.
happen all at once. And we're not going to get out of it overnight.
Sure.
It's going to be, taking little steps of faith and growing along the way.
Yeah. And you were talking, just to go back a little bit, and not to hark too much on it, but you were talking about where our budget has been and stuff like that. And we have approved a deficit budget last year and stuff like that. And the work that he was talking about has helped us get closer to that zero mark, of where we're not operating in the red, essentially. And that's the work that we continue, because we want to be good stewards with the money we have as well. This is a church-wide practice. There is that individualness to it that I think Kendall spoke well about, is there's that personal side of it. But also as a church is we want to take care of how the church uses its money as well, so that it doesn't have to be a hindrance for ministries going forward.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Or it doesn't have to be, so we don't have to worry about, are we going to have enough money to pay so-and-so or start this new ministry? Like, we can go, yeah, God's calling us to this. Let's make it happen.
If we are faithful,
Yeah.
we will have enough.
Yeah.
We might not have everything that, we think we need,
Right.
but we will have what God needs us to have
Yeah.
to do the work that we're called to do.
Correct.
It will be provided. And so, going back again to, I think the major theme of today was the difference between having this mindset, or I call it a theology of scarcity, versus a theology of abundance, an understanding of God's abundance. I think about one of the stories that I shared of, the disciples, when they looked around and saw this huge need with 5,000 people that were hungry, that needed to be fed. And Jesus is trying to teach them about what it meant to be, faithful and generous. And so he said, where can we buy bread? How much bread? And one said, there's no way. There's no possible way we can feed all these people. If we took 6 months of somebody's salary, it would just give everybody just a bite.
Yeah.
So we need to send them home. And Jesus said, had another way, and that's something else in mind. And so it just took that little boy being generous.
Yeah. Here's what I have.
This is what I have, and God bless that. And there are other people, and I think it works either way. There are some people that say that was a miracle of generosity, that everybody would not have made this trip out there if they had not brought some provisions. It works either way for me, whether or not he just took those and multiplied it, or it was that suddenly people decided to share with each other, and they had 12 baskets left over.
Yeah.
However that works, it leans into God's theology of abundance.
Sure.
Our understanding of God, that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills,
Yep.
that God created and God will provide, and he promised us our daily bread.
Amen.
We pray for that,
Yep.
to provide us with our daily bread.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway.
Well, Dave, I think this has been good. I think as we continue, because next week we'll have our last Ripples of Generosity, and I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about the pledge cards and all that real quick before we go. But I think for overall, it's just a look inwards of how are we trying to live a scarce life, or are we trying to live in abundance?
Right.
And,
Are we trying to be a hoarder, or are we trying to be a giver?
Right.
If you hoard it, it's going to be like those Israelites with the manna. It's just, it's not going to last.
Yeah.
But if we invest it into the kingdom of God, it's going to spread. So next week is what we sometimes refer to in church speak as Pledge Sunday. Mm-hmm. And so there will be a time in the service where people can bring those estimate of giving cards or pledge cards to the altar. I do like the term estimate of giving, because circumstances can change. People can lose jobs. They can get raises. There are things. And so, but making that estimate of giving, looking at where we are right now, what do I think I can give to the church? And it is a way of being accountable, because I think sometimes when people write it down, they're more apt to follow through with it. So, it's that act of accountability, but also helps our finance people to figure out how to do our
The
budgets
ministries
and
we can
that
do
kind
and
of
stuff.
stuff. And it's also kind of puts a marker to see how we grow from year to year. So that's next week. It's also the Sunday before Thanksgiving, so this is the time of being thankful, and we intentionally do that around Thanksgiving. But we're grateful for our church and our community and the people here, and so we have a way to give back to that and express that through our Sunday next week. So if you are a person who just maybe watches online or watches this podcast online, and you want to pledge, want to do an estimate of giving card, that something about the sermons or this podcast has led you to want to do that as an act of faith, I will say that, not to sound too much like a TV preacher here, but you can go to our website, hickoryflat.org, and you can get the materials there that you can download them from a PDF. For most people, we have many pledge cards and the other materials here at the church, and I'll also be sending out an email again this week with those materials, so you can look for those in your inbox.
There you go. And if for some reason you're not attached to our email, and just shoot us an email and we can make sure to get you that if for some reason you can't find it.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
without further ado, thanks Dave for this, and thank you guys for watching. If you have any interactions or any comments about what we've spoken about today, drop it in the chat boxes below the Facebook, on the YouTube, and all that. And we do look at those. And yeah, I guess without further ado, guys, we'll catch you guys next time.
All right, thanks. God bless.